All right, all the crying and depression about the NCAA tournament is over. All the bitterness about the NIT is over. It's time to move on to the offseason. What does that look like for Pitt basketball? Obviously, some big questions to answer, both in terms of the current roster and what they add to the roster. And there's three big letters that are going to have a whole lot to do with both of those things. And incidentally, they share a couple of letters with NIT. That's not even a coincidence. That doesn't matter at all. Of course, I'm talking about NIL. That's going to dictate so much of what happens this offseason. So let's talk about what that's going to look like for Pitt, who they're going to bring back, what their priorities are going to be, and what they'll try to get out of the transfer portal. We're going to answer all of those questions, or try, here on a Tuesday morning on the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, I have to make it sound like we've got all the answers just to get you to stay watching the video and stay tuned in because, look, nobody's got all the answers right now. I'm not even sure if the Pitt coaches have all of the answers, and chances are that, with the way things move and the way things go, between the time when I record this video and the time when you watch this video or listen to this podcast, things might change. There might be a whole new storyline out there. That's just the way it works in the transfer portal these days. But the reality is that's what Pitt is facing. As the offseason begins, they're going to have a lot of transfer portal questions. Who do they get out of the transfer portal? Who do they lose to the transfer portal? And I just hope that nothing major happens between the time I record this and the time it gets released. Because once it gets released, then we're good. We're in the clear. But if something major changes between the time I record this and the time it gets released, I might be tempted to have to go in and re-record. And I hate doing that. Of course, you know what we always ask you to do. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place where we put all of our exclusive Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday. A little bit of Pitt sports talk to get your day started. We have our weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We'll have that this week at 8 o'clock. Might be 8:30. I have to lock in a time. I liked doing it at 8. Sometimes we push it back to 8:30, and it seems to go pretty well. Then, also, so I'll have to figure out what the best time is to do this thing. Let's tentatively plan for 8 o'clock, and we'll adjust if we have to. And then we do, but if you're like, come on, man, you got to settle on a time. Just pick a time for this stupid show so we always know when it's going to happen. You're right. That's a fair request. But here's an idea. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you click the little subscribe button down there in the corner, then you can turn on notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live, so you don't have to worry like, oh, God, what time are they starting this week? I have no idea when it's happening. Or like on Sunday night when we just decided to do sort of an emergency, live stream to talk about the NCAA tournament, leaving Pitt out. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I didn't see the tweet or I didn't see the post about it. Well, no, because you'll get the notification that we are live. So that would be my suggestion. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and turn on notifications, and that way you don't miss any of our live streams, no matter when they happen. Of course, we have post-game shows that are a lot of fun. There's no more games for a long time, so we won't have any of those until the fall. But we'll, once the games start up again, football or basketball, we'll be live for post-game shows right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So we got a lot that goes on here. Plus, we have practice highlights from the South Side from spring camp, which Pitt will get started again this morning in the South Side. They resume spring camp after taking a week off for spring break. So we'll have highlights from there, interviews, and press conferences, all those kinds of things. It's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's a place to get all of your Pitt sports needs. Football, basketball, recruiting, we cover it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you and hundreds and thousands of your other Pitt fans can get together and talk about Pitt sports all day, every day. It's the best online community of Pitt sports fans you're going to find. And it's right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, so the offseason, it's here. It's officially here for Pitt basketball. It was here yesterday, but we had other things to talk about. Now we have the offseason to talk about and what Pitt needs, what Pitt's going to have to do, and what challenges and battles they're going to face as they head into the offseason. And the first three letters that matter, the biggest three letters that matter, and it was this case, this was the case with football, and it's the case with basketball, and it's the case with any sport in college athletics. It's NIL. And everything that happens is going to be determined or dictated in large part by NIL. It won't be the only factor for some of these players and transfers as they make certain decisions about their futures, but it's a significant factor and one of the biggest factors that's going to be in play here. And when you look back at last December with all the sort of secret but not so secret storylines that evolved and emerged over the course of the month, with players potentially going into the portal, players going into the portal, players coming back out of the portal, players going to a different school from the portal, players coming to Pitt from the portal. NIL was a factor in, I would say, if not 100% of those cases, 99% of them, and maybe 99.5. It's a factor, and it impacts all of this. And we're more and more getting to, I joked about the quiet part not even being the quiet part anymore. Like, oh, they're saying the quiet part out loud. There is no quiet part, and even legally, it's being ruled that you can't really punish schools for using NIL as recruiting inducements. And so, it is what it is, and everyone understands what it is. And I think as Pitt prepares or has been preparing for this offseason, they're in it now, so preparations need to have already been made. Part of it was a question of what's it going to take to keep the key pieces of this roster together heading into 2024-2025 season. And the reality is, and I don't think anyone needs, I'm going to try not to start too many sentences with the reality is. I think everybody knows what the reality is and what the realities are. But I think when you look at Pitt's current roster and the potential returning players, and they had, 3 guys walk on senior night? At least one of them, Will Jeffers, potentially could come back. So you have most of the rest of the roster potentially returning. And I think when you look at the rest of the roster, there's 3 obvious priorities in no specific order: Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett. It's that backcourt, particularly the freshmen, but Leggett included. Bringing back as much of that backcourt as possible is the number one priority for Pitt this offseason. You could talk about getting a big, you could talk about getting a center, trying to fill out that position, and that's important, and that's something Pitt will need to attempt to do. And whether they'll be successful or not remains to be seen. And I'll talk about that in a second, about why that remains to be seen and why I'm at least somewhat skeptical about their ability to bring in an impact big man transfer. And like I said, I'll get to that in a second because it relates to what we're talking about here. But the biggest priorities, the things they need to be focused on the most, the things I think they are focused on the most, and the things that will have the biggest impact on next season are what happens in the backcourt. What happens with Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett. And each of those situations is unique. Each of those situations is different, and there are going to be different factors that influence each of those situations. The reality with Bub Carrington right now is that there's a question of whether he'll be playing in college next year at all. He has established himself as a bona fide NBA prospect. The question is whether he feels, whether he and the people around him and the people helping him make his decision feel that he has established himself to the point where it's time to go, and he could potentially be a lottery pick in what might not be the strongest of drafts and might not be the strongest of first round, prospects next year, this coming draft, or whether he feels like he can benefit more from coming back to college for another year. Now, it's sort of like, you start at the top and it's, okay, college or NBA, right? And that's the first decision that's going to have to be made, college or NBA. But then you come over here, and if it's NBA, okay, then that's, the line ends there. But if we come over here to the college side, then it becomes a question of Pitt or transfer. And that's where we come into the same discussion that we're going to be having about Jalen Lowe and the same discussion we have about Ishmael Leggett. Lowe and Leggett are, if we set Carrington aside and understand that his decision is a different one, at least his initial decision is a different one from Lowe and Leggett. Lowe and Leggett are facing similar decisions to each other. They're sort of both looking at this situation of transfer versus stay at Pitt. And I'm not sitting here saying that I've talked to Jalen Lowe specifically, I've talked to Ishmael Leggett specifically, and they've told me that they're thinking about transferring. I think we all have to put our heads around, and I think we all Anybody who followed football through December, through that month of December, and anyone who's just sort of generally been paying attention to college athletics understands that, look, this is the reality for everybody. This is the reality for all of these guys. Every college basketball player who is good is going to face that decision. Do I stay or do I transfer? It's a reality for every guy. And I think anyone who is, like I say, who is good, who's shown ability, who's shown potential, the younger the better. Although in some cases, getting veteran senior guards or veteran senior players is a huge bonus as well. Look, there are going to be opportunities out there. I can guarantee you there are schools that would love to have Jalen Lowe on their roster and will at least make an attempt to get him. I can guarantee that there are schools out there that would love to have Ishmael Leggett on their roster, and they will make attempts to get him. There are schools out there that would love to have Bub Carrington on their roster, and they will make attempts to get him. Nothing is off limits, and nothing should come as a surprise. Now, that doesn't mean that every guy is likely to go. That doesn't mean that every guy is itching to go. There are certain, realities where, certain factors that go into situations. Like if you look at Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe, right? Both of those guys came to Pitt. I can't speak to whatever sort of NIL was involved in their recruitment, but what I can say is I think the main factor in their decisions to come to Pitt was Jeff Capel and the Pitt coaching staff. Certainly the success that Pitt had last season didn't hurt, but Capel has connections to those players' families, to Carrington's family and Lowe's family. And I think there is something to be said for that. I think there is something that matters there, and I think it was a significant factor in getting both of those guys to come here. Jalen Lowe came a long way from Texas to be coached by Jeff Capel. Bub Carrington came to Pitt to be coached by Jeff Capel, and that's not unimportant. Ishmael Leggett came from Rhode Island, got an opportunity coming out of Rhode Island to come and play at the ACC level and prove that he could hang at this level. Prove that he was that caliber of player. And that's not unimportant because I almost said it. I almost said the reality is, but there is a certain truth that in some cases, and I think you see this on football and basketball, on both sides, where players may be inclined to take a hometown discount. And I use that phrase. That's a common phrase that you hear off. I think usually in baseball is probably where you hear it the most, although a little bit, like MLB, like professional baseball, a little bit in professional football. But I think there is some element in college basketball. I think Blake Hinson took a hometown discount to return. I don't know if guys on the football side, guys like Gavin Bartholomew or Kenny Johnson, got the most they possibly could have gotten. But they came back to Pitt. That could end up being a factor with guys like Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett. I think if you're Pitt, you're kind of hoping that that's going to be a factor with Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett. That there are things bigger than just the NIL money that maybe you are willing to. Maybe you're willing to take less, which, still taking a substantial amount, but maybe taking a little bit less than you could get on the quote unquote the open market. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Pitt is going to, not have to worry as much about resources and not have to worry about as much about raising money to put together NIL packages, because I think it's still going to take a substantial amount to keep this backcourt together. And again, provided the opportunity presents itself with Bub Carrington as he faces, other decisions than what Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett are looking at. But the number one thing for Pitt this offseason is keeping as many of those three guys. The worst case scenario obviously would be losing all of them. Only getting one back is not a great scenario. You really need a minimum of two. I think I think you'll be okay if you get two out of those three back. Ideally, you could get all three, but that's going to take some work. It's going to be a bit of an uphill battle, I think, to get all three back. you need at least two. Because if you bring at least two back and you bring in Brandon Cummings as a freshman, maybe you can get another guard, out of the transfer portal, like someone to come in and be your third or fourth guard, somewhere around there. If you can bring Zach Austin back as a wing, then you're starting to. I think you're filling out nicely around those guards. I know there's a question of getting a big man, and I know that Pitt fans are saying they just need to get a big man. I just don't know. Like, I think the priority has to be the guards, and I think the guards are going to take up a significant chunk of the NIL budget. Probably significant enough that you're not going to be able to get the kind of big man that Pitt fans are dreaming of. Does that mean that you ride into 2024-25 with Federico and Papa Conti? I mean, it seems less than ideal to do so. Ideally, you'd get to a spot where your center position is shored up enough that Guillermo Diaz-Graham can move out and play the 4. As it stands, I wouldn't be surprised to see Pitt going out and trying to recruit a power forward out of the transfer portal, given that Blake Hinson is leaving. Obviously, his career at Pitt is over. You can sell those minutes. And, there's another challenge sort of inherent in here as well. With the guards, it's going to be very difficult to recruit guards out of the transfer portal as long as it looks like you are possible or likely to bring back all 3 of those guys that are currently on the roster. They ran into some of that issue last year where I think it was challenging to find a point guard out of the portal when it looked like you had Dior Johnson, Jalen Lowe, and Bub Carrington on the roster. I think you're going to have similar issues this year. You should be able to go get a power forward because, Blake Hinson's gone and he was our number 1 guy, and look at all the minutes that are open now. You should be able to get a power forward. I don't know if you're going to get a guy who can replace Blake Hinson because he's kind of one of one. But ideally, you'd be able to get a center and shore up that position to the point where Guillermo Diaz-Graham doesn't need to play as a 5, where he can move out and be in what is really his natural position as a 4. But if you're unable to supplement that center position, if you're unable to get to a spot where you're comfortable with it, then Guillermo's going to have to continue playing the 5, which is less than ideal. I just think the priority has to be on those guards. Those guards are the guys that you need to build around. But it's going to take a lot to keep them. And I think that would be money well spent, because I think if you could get all 3 of those guards back, you should have the expectation of being an NCAA tournament team next season. You should have an expectation of playing for a double bye again next season, because with those 3 guards back, you're going to be really good. With Lowe and Carrington as sophomores and Ishmael Leggett as a senior, I love that foundation for the team. You know what I mean? I think that's a great piece to build around. But you are going to have to find ways to add other guys in. It's just going to take getting creative. You know what I mean? And working around who can you realistically get, who fits what you need. And that's going to be a challenge. And this is going to be the way it is every offseason until there's something a little more structured put in place as far as employment or contracts or revenue sharing or salaries or whatever it ends up being. But while this is the landscape with the transfer portal and NIL, you have to find a way to operate within that landscape. And player retention is the number 1 priority. I think if you have players like these guys, player retention is the number 1 priority. And, I think that was the case for the football team, and I think it's the case for the basketball team as well. So that's what they've got to do. Bub Carrington's probably going to take some time because he's got to decide where his future is, where he's going to be next season. Not just what college, but is it going to be in college or not? I think that's the decision he is facing, and that's going to take time. That's probably going to take longer than it takes to figure out what happens with Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of conclusion or resolution with Lowe and Leggett, I don't know, in the next couple of weeks maybe shorter, while we wait a little bit longer to find out what's going to happen with Carrington. And then you're also sort of keeping an eye on the rest of the roster. retention of the guards is the priority, but you're also, you have to have some other guys return. It's just determining what the value is with Federico, the Diaz-Graham twins. What does Marlon Barnes do after redshirting for a year? What does Will Jeffers do after walking on senior night but still having eligibility left? There's some moving pieces. You know what I mean? There's some parts that you're going to have to work on as well. But the number one priority is retaining those guards. And you see the man there, Jeff Capel. He's got his work cut out for him. And Pitt and their NIL operations. And the last thing I would say about it, I think there have been encouraging signs in terms of Pitt, the athletic department's commitment to supporting the NIL efforts. I think you're seeing little things start to creep up, like the Panther Club, showing a little more outward, overt, forward-facing support for Alliance 412 and its efforts. I think that's big. I mean, that's as much of sort of an official endorsement as we've seen thus far from Pitt's athletic department. There's more they could do on that front, but that's that's the most we've seen so far. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a positive step. We just, they have to keep doing it, and trying to drive those efforts, because this is ultimately what's going to play a pretty big factor in the success that these programs have. So we'll see. All right, football coverage today on Panther-Lair.com. We'll be at spring camp. We'll have a report from the morning practice. We'll have photos and videos and press conferences and quotes and articles and all those happy things that we do all the time right there at Panther-Lair.com, and of course our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. And we'll be back tomorrow. Probably talking some football tomorrow, unless some news comes out about basketball. We'll shift gears and we'll talk about that. So lots of Pitt coverage as always on Panther-Lair.com and right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you had a great Monday to start your week. I hope your Tuesday goes well, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.